That's why I'm always pushing open weight stuff on the podcast. Is it's like, control the means of your token generation.
Hello, and welcome back to Artificial Developer Intelligence, a weekly conversation show about AI and software development. We discuss the most interesting set of AI news, tools, and techniques each week by going through hundreds of links and dozens of newsletters, so you don't have to. My name is Shimen Zhang, and with me today is my co-host, Dan. He's trained on ancient garbage, Lasky. Dan, how are you? Rahul is out this week. He's busy on vacation somewhere.
I'm doing okay. I guess I kind of am trained on ancient garbage. Years and years of cruft built up in my brain.
Yeah, if by ancient garbage we mean the classical texts, like ancient Babylonian.
Oh, I thought you meant like really, really old, like outdated HTML and JavaScript specs.
That too, yeah.
Like I think it was
Egyptian
from,
glyphs and the break text. Like, what difference does it
it
make?
was when they called it like DHTML, which basically meant that you could start manipulating the DOM via JavaScript. Yeah. Anyway,
I thought me
that's
calling
pretty
it
ancient.
Ajax is ancient, but it gets
No, this
the rabbit
predated
hole goes
Ajax.
deep.
Yeah.
I bet it does. Well, on the show this week, we're going to start with the news thread mail, as always, where we're going to talk about the Minimax 8.7 model, as well as Anthropic's latest model that's so good that we couldn't use it.
True. And then we will be going to this is questionably the tool shed. I'll give it to you, but why AI sucks at front end. It's really maybe more of a post-processing, but yeah. So we'll be talking about that a little bit. And then
we'll have a debate about where that post belongs. And then we're going to go to the Technique Corner, where we'll talk about your parallel agent limit.
Then followed quickly by post-processing, where we're going to have a couple different posts we're going through today. So there's the LLM Wiki, which we'll be chatting about, and then a sort of counter post to some of the opinions we've talked about previously on here, which is like code is cheap now, and that changes everything. So it's a pretty interesting perspective to look at. And then
I'm going to vibe and tell about what it is like to lose my favorite agent harness and also working on the new ADI site, followed by
a couple things. So we're actually going to do a Dan's rant this week. I've found something that I'm angry about on the internet, so we'll talk about that. Stay tuned to find out what it is. And then we're bringing back an old favorite.
Yeah, as always, other than last week, really, we're going to talk about 2 minutes to midnight, where we talk about the latest development in the financial side of the AI bubble.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Yes. Well, to start, let's talk about Minimax 2.7.
I actually had to Google Minimax to know if it was a separate lab or not. So I just wanted to disclose that up front because I didn't know. So it turns out they are, in fact, a Shanghai-based lab, which I didn't realize. But yeah, so they've released the new M2.7 model. And, I like to cover open weight stuff a lot on this podcast. But the thing that is particularly interesting about this one is that it trained itself, sort of. So there was a pretty big announcement from them that essentially you're probably going to describe this better than I am, but I'll try to do first. They gave the model itself the ability to run like an LLM arena kind of thing on a discrete GPU, and then it could analyze its own performance based on that, and then suggested changes to its own. I don't know if it was purely code or weights or what, but like essentially there was a feedback loop. That's maybe where you can help me a little bit. That was then fed back into the next training cycle, and they did that 10 times or something like that. And overall, they claimed like essentially a 30% improvement in some of the benchmark scores, and overall it scored fairly well on benchmarks. Yeah.
So yeah, I I was gonna say I just pretty much agree. They didn't release like the harness around for which they were running these agent experiments at, right? They gave the model itself, which is already a 229 billion parameter model, so like a medium-sized model, a medium to large-sized model, running 3 24-hour trials with a harness around memory, feedback, and self-optimization. There has been a lot of talk in the AI space about recursive self-improvement, RSI. The idea that as the models get better, they will reach a certain point where they will be able to self-improve, kind of like the singularity type event. And I've heard folks like Mark Andreessen talk about RSI as a thing that is already happening in the industry. But personally, I haven't come across any actual experimental results or even announcements around RSI. So the fact that Minimax is able to use its own model to lead to a 30% performance improvement is the first experimental result announcement that I've seen in this RSI field. So I thought it would be good to discuss it. The hard part would be talking about recursive self-improvement without sounding like one of those machines will take over, we're doomed, singularity nerds.
Well,
Terminator.
the thing that's a little different about this is that it still wound up being a baked model, right? It's not recursive self-improvement like in the wild. Does that make sense? Like it's not continuously happening. It's like this was part of the training process, essentially, like an additional like post-training step almost. But that does make me think, right? That was the first thing I thought of when I read this is like, ooh, how far out are we from someone deploying that like essentially live continuous training, especially if you could somehow do it on real data that you were then collecting like from users. Did this work or not? The little thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing that you get on each of the responses.
Rahul isn't here today, so I'm going to try and speak for him. What changes here?
You're firing all the copywriters using
yeah, let's get rid of all the technical.
M2.7 tech writers.
What happens here is the model improvement process, if RSI is established, moves from a labor bottleneck, we need to hire the best PhDs to improve our models, into a capital bottleneck. Who can spend the most money running the most number of parallel experimentations? And I think that has fundamental implications to where the industry is going. Namely, that it's going to suck up even more capital than it already is.
It could be, but like it didn't seem like this used a ton of it. And I guess that's the other part to maybe note here is that like it didn't, the runs that they gave it were just more or less standard inference runs, right? So it's not like training where it took like a huge network cluster of GPUs. Like they were running each experiment on a single, I think they say A30 in there.
Yeah. But if it is correct...
So yes, I guess if you do them parallel, like massively parallel, you'd in theory get better results. I don't know.
Yeah, and my suspicion is like Anthropic and OpenAI are already doing this. Like that's
like
what
huge scales. Yeah.
Yeah. Mark Andreessen's comments like lead me to think is like a lot of companies are already doing this. So
yeah, well,
so I think
wouldn't
the
be
shift
surprising
is
too. It's assuming the like original sort of 6-month lead that we claim for the U.S. frontier labs over like Chinese labs is still true. Then you could assume that they've been doing it for 6 months at least.
Yeah, exactly. 6 to 12 months already.
Is that a fair assumption? I don't know, but
I think it seems reasonable.
Good enough for the podcaster.
Yeah, let's wait for the U.S. frontier labs to also announce that they've been doing RSI. I think that announcement's probably coming pretty soon. But the other news item we have this week is, of course,
speaking of U.S. frontier lab announcements
and self-improving models,
or lack thereof, sort of.
Yeah, how do we even? This is a news that everyone's been talking about all week.
Well, let's start with the backstory a little bit, right? So outside of the scope of this article, so I think I'd even put this on or hinted at it in one of the previous podcasts, is like we read a little bit of stuff where in addition to the Claude Code source leak, they also accidentally published like some internal blogs or something like that had references to this Mythos model. And so there'd been hints of it sort of floating around, and people weren't sure, like, is it real? Is that just a code name? Like, what's going on? And then fast forward to, go ahead.
Right. Tuesday of last week, really the same day we were recording last week's episode, Anthropic pushed out the system card for its new model named Mythos. But Anthropic also stated that because Mythos is such a step up in capabilities from Opus, that it is not going to release it to the public due to the dozens of security vulnerabilities that it has found. What Anthropic is going to do instead is partnering with large corporations like Amazon, Apple, Broadcom, Cisco, CrowdStrike, etc., to patch up the infrastructure software layer that is the foundation of our modern world, I want to say.
Kinda, yeah.
In order to give these established players time to patch the vulnerabilities before releasing the model to the public. And this partner organization previewing program is called Project Glasswing. And this is, we are reading the report from TechCrunch, but Anthropic itself has its own page about, securing critical software for the AI era. I think the biggest things we should be looking at when it comes to Mythos is look at what kind of vulnerabilities they're actually finding, right? Are we talking about fairly minor bugs, or are we talking about system crashing bugs? So if we read the Mythos preview blog post from red.anthropic.com, we see that they're talking about 27-year-old bugs from from Linux and OpenBSD, and these vulnerabilities include anywhere from gaining root level access to crashing servers by sending requests through the network. So it does sound like
I saw, which I don't know if they're covered in this, but and it's just more of like internet rumors than real confirmed thing, was someone pointed at Firefox's JavaScript virtual machine, and it was able to essentially escape the sandbox of the virtual machine 85% of the time.
Yep.
Now, what that percent means, I don't know. I guess they asked it to escape or something, and I guess maybe it basically means like pretty much the backbone of like web application security, like having interactive websites in the first place would be, crippled, assuming it can do something similar with Chromium, right? And V8, so it'd be pretty wild.
I think I read a tweet that said something along the lines of regular folks are looking at the stock market or whatnot, and professional security researchers are converting their cash into gold bars. Something along the lines of that as a way of indicating how serious these security threats are. Is in talk with the Fed and major banking institutions in the United States as a part of this Project Glasswing project. Look, man, a lot of times we talk about, hey, is this marketing or is this actually
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking
Manhattan
it too.
Project?
I was like, I might need to put on my fake security researcher hat, or not security researcher, skeptic hat for a minute, and be like, if you were to do a viral marketing campaign, I don't know that you could do one more masterfully than this.
All right. Yeah, and the fact that they are not releasing the details of these exploits,
right? Exactly, and that's why,
for obvious reasons. Yeah.
It reminds me of like when people were concerned about like quantum computers breaking like SSL or other like the true, fundamental underpinnings of security online, which may still happen, but like, it's the people are treating it with that level of like doom, I guess, is what it feels like.
I've also heard this being described as Y2K 2.0.
Yeah, it does. It feels like that, right? Yeah.
A little bit, it does. In a couple of weeks, once the security issues are patched, I think we're going to learn a lot more. But as of right now, it really does feel like the United States has detonated an experimental nuclear blast. Everybody else around the world is like, how would this affect my life going forward? I don't know. The model was not explicitly trained to look for security exploits. So I thought that was interesting. This is an emergent behavior from just the general capacities of the model, point A. And point B is they also mentioned in this blog post that they're not doing any groundbreaking security vulnerability techniques. What the model is able to do is take multiple vulnerability primitives and chain them into a stack in order to do these more major exploits.
And that's something we're sort of seeing writ large too, is it's like chaining is getting easier and faster, like across the board, as like I think threat actors start using just AI generally. And then the other one we're seeing is like supply chain attacks are getting much easier to do and much easier to do at scale, because like previously you would have had to like submit PRs, and now you're like, Claude, submit these PRs.
Right.
Go. All repos. They look like they would take them, and they're doing all that wild stuff like invisible Unicode characters.
Yeah. Yeah, it's mostly a mechanical process, but humans are not very good at spending a huge amount of time doing very tedious things of like chaining primitives together, especially when they're exploits that, are memory leaks and
or like
stack
really
attacks.
deep chains, like
right.
You need to execute these 15 vulnerabilities sequentially in this order with this timing, or else it doesn't work.
Right. So we talked about the jagged frontier of AI before. Like this seems like one such jagged frontier where the AI capabilities is so much ahead of what humans can do. Every script kitty is now a script tiger, a script leopard. I've been looking for a new large mythical creature for maybe like a script griffin. Ooh,
I mean, if
like
they were kitties, now they're more like script adults. I don't know.
Yeah. So what do you think about where we're gonna see this will go in a couple of weeks?
I'll partially take off my skeptic hat like halfway. I think that this will probably have some impact. Will it be as big as everyone's forecasting? Probably not. And it's going to depend on how they go about releasing the model, assuming they do. Like, is it just going to be a, Opus 4.6 style rollout where like you get it if you pay for it and it's more expensive? Or is it still going to be like more like a beta kind of thing where they opt in, like big companies can run it for a while like they're doing now, but like broader, you know what I mean? And then after that, maybe then they roll it out to the public. I'm not sure.
I also wonder what this means for the open source software. Like, is it a good thing where the open source software will get hit by the most number of Mythos requests and therefore be extra safe? Or will folks go back to closed source software because
I don't think the security model of open source changes, right? Like the open source is always like the claim has always been open source is more secure, at least when it comes to security projects, because it's vetted by more people, more experts have a chance to look at it, and more people can contribute, which means that like in theory it winds up, at least in a world where supply chain attacks aren't happening all the time, you wind up with like a more hardened thing, overall.
Yeah, and given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. I think they mentioned that in this blog
And who's to
post.
say that you couldn't then take the same model and apply it to fix open source at scale?
A binary.
Yeah.
Lastly, I want to end this discussion on a positive note. There is a silver lining in all of this. Consider this. Currently, a lot of governments and government agencies, both in the United States and abroad, not looking at you, countries, Gulf nation states, are willing, and North Korea, let's tag them on too, are willing to pay millions of dollars for zero-day exploits created by humans and discovered by humans in order to do all kinds of nefarious things. If AI is indeed supernaturally good at looking for security vulnerabilities, then in the long term, this would actually make our open source software that much more secure.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. Hot takes. Cool. Moving on. We have
AI sucks at front end. Brought to you by
Adam Argyle.
Yes. I thought this was pretty interesting. It's almost a little bit borderline Dan's Rants territory. Whether or not it belongs in the tool shed, I don't know. I'm pretty sure I misclicked when I was categorizing it and you just ran with it. So the gist of this blog post is that AI is great at doing sort of like UI grunt work that you may not want to handle as a software engineer. So the example that they gave was updating or swapping around design tokens. So, things like your colors and sort of style primitives and stuff like that in a design system, but that it is particularly not great at coming up with unique designs. So if you ask AI to design something, you will get very run of the mill. Like, it's not bad looking, it's just not like innovative, I guess, design. And then the other issue they call out specifically is you can one shot the entire like interface for your application. But as soon as you go try to tweak something, especially if it's like highly involved CSS wise, like you're doing some sort of CSS tricks, as it were, it just falls apart. And either I think of the words of the blog, pulls something you haven't seen since IE6, or or just doesn't do a good job at like giving you a pixel perfect thing. And so the rationale that they're claiming behind this is one, it is trained on ancient garbage, just like me. LMs are trained on what's publicly available, and unfortunately, just like by law of averages, there's not very good or not a lot of exceptional and like cutting edge CSS like floating around on the internet, at least in terms of open source repos for it to be trained on. Their second point, which is one that I feel deeply from having used LLMs for UI stuff, is they literally cannot see, right? I mean, I think we've probably talked about this in the past, but I feel like Gemini is like much better at sort of visual stuff than Claude is. But even then, it literally can't like necessarily understand what you mean when you describe like the vertical line here is off by 4 pixels or something like that. Or my other personal favorite is when I was playing around with like essentially a canvas based render, it was like, as you can see, the red box is on the screen, and I was like, no, it's not. There is no red box. And then it turned out the issue was like I was using a scene graph, and it didn't know that you needed to like attach parents to children in the scene graph, otherwise it won't run. Which is like, I think really kind of speaks to the first point of it's trained on ancient garbage, right? There probably wasn't very much scene graph code floating around, particularly like out there, whereas there is a crap ton of React code, So yeah, this both resonated with me a little bit, and also I thought was a little bit of a hot take in terms of, I have had like reasonable experiences using Claude, particularly for doing like especially UX development, and I've even done some like pixel perfect shuffling with it that it actually did reasonably well on. And I think it helped if you can like explain what the elements are in a really succinct way that you're trying to move around, instead of just sort of like talking about it in a general sense. That like the thing that's actually rendering as a circle on your screen is actually a LI tag with some styling on it. So you go, no, it's the LI that's doing this, that's off by X, and then
right. But if we're talking about LI tags, then we're back to talking about HTML, which is a thing that it knows fairly well, right? Like it has an idea of the DOM because it's just tokens to it.
Well, yeah, but I mean like specifying what element so that it can be smarter about what it's doing with the styling, essentially.
Right.
Like what Claude did when I was messing around with that kind of layout is like it actually went in and I gave it this CLI tool that I sort of like vibe forked from someone. That's like essentially the Chrome dev protocol stuff as a CLI instead of an MCP. And so nothing really earth shattering, and then it's able to like execute JavaScript as well in the browser context. So it was running like get bounding recs all over the place to understand the layout parameter, and then just doing math to figure it out, which I thought was like actually kind of a pretty clever approach,
It's impressive when it does work.
Yeah. So it was just doing it with pure math, which is like, okay.
I think, well, a few thoughts. One, I think the current tools just hasn't been trained to mimic the human aesthetic sense, right? Like that's a limitation of our training. I think if some frontier lab spent a ton of time, and like Google being the one with all the data and all the training, like they can produce something that does a much better job of matching human aesthetic preferences. And in fact, they have created Google Stitch, which is a huge leg up to the generic Claude code, let's make a cool website prompt that I've used to almost no success. It's always generating like the most generic looking, mismatching colory kind of layouts possible.
Yeah.
So there need to be like a image native way. Give it feedback, give it an actual browser so it can take it has the ability of taking snapshots and then parsing the image files to do a deeper dive.
Say that to some degree. I don't think we'll ever necessarily be successful there without it being some sort of like averaged thing, right? And the reason I think that is because there's this like element of human taste that there's just no accounting for. You know? There's people that genuinely love like Comic Sans that are out there and like set their phones custom Android UI to be Comic Sans, you know, and they're like, oh, let me show you this thing, and they whip out your phone and you just look at it and you're like, what am I looking at? And they're like, this cool link, and I'm like, no, I'm looking at your font. What happened? What did you do?
Like the Ryan Gosling Papyrus skit
Yeah.
from SNL. I don't know if you
Yeah.
saw that.
I
I
did
just sent
not.
that to you afterwards. It's also interesting that, for a long time, folks were saying, hey, frontend will be the first one to get automated. But this actually posits that maybe backend development is easier to automate via AI than front-end development. It's the revenge of the front-end developers.
Well,
I am once unbiased here.
I would argue that it's a little more nuanced than that, right? Because it's like if you give a decent vision model like Gemini a mock that's been done by like a professional designer, right? It will execute the mock reasonably well, assuming it's like not doing anything too crazy. So from that perspective, you could argue that front end development is dead. But like, quite frankly, I haven't seen that style of standalone front end development where it's like you take the picture and you spit out the CSS and the HTML and do nothing else, be a thing in quite some time. This is like back in the days when people were making like blog templates and selling them online. I guess people still do that to some degree, but like,
the .com bubble days. Where all you need is know what a tag is.
That's not what front-end development in 2026 means. It's like basically be full stack from the control plane on up. And yeah,
I still think Google probably has the most potential when it comes to in the Western labs, when it comes to creating and productizing a visual-based LLM or multimodal LLM that works well for front-end development. But we will see about that. And also a big fan of Adam Argyle. He used to be I think he was the Chrome DevRel person for a long time. So I've been following his work for a number of years. He had a web-based podcast on CSS for a long time. And to go from Adam to Eddie Osmani, we're just in Google land today.
Yeah. Dev relations.
We have a post-processing post from Eddie titled Your Parallel Agent Limit. Remember last week when we were talking about what happens when your cognitive debt gets you cognitive bankrupt and how you just collect a little bit of cognitive interest rate this entire time? This article talks about how do you find your sustainable agent interest rate in terms of this before, so you don't hit cognitive bankruptcy. So in like a country, you have this idea, right? Like a country can always borrow money as long as the GDP is growing at or matching the interest rate. So your parallel agent limit is like the right interest rate you can pay so that you still have, so you're not incurring too much cognitive debt. And we've talked a lot about the phenomenon of cognitive debt on this podcast, but we haven't really talked about how do you know when you're incurring cognitive debt and like what are the guidelines for determining that. So this blog post posits that, first it defines a problem of working with multiple agents at once, which is the more agents you have, the more context switching calls you have. And context switching is very expensive for a developer. And the more different the tasks are, the longer running the tasks are, the more switching calls you're going to incur also. It's this constant switching back of multiple agents, multiple projects that are all long running. So every time you have to switch, you have to load a lot into your head in context terms that makes working with agents, multiple agents, exhausting. He also talks about when you have multiple agents running, you have to be vigilant the whole time to make sure they don't go off the rails. So that vigilant overhead is also taxing for you. The whole thing becomes draining when you have 12 agents running at the same time and you're just like going back and forth. Oh, is agent C doing okay? Or is agent D stuck? I wonder what agent E is doing at the same time. Like that all becomes an issue. And he calls it comprehension debt. We call it cognitive debt. The idea is the same. Like you can't keep up until eventually you give up and you go off the rails. A phenomenon that was really interesting from this post is this idea that adding agents don't scale linearly. Like having one agent is really straightforward. Having two agents becomes significantly harder, but still doable. At some point, though, it's almost like a geometric increase, right? At some point, you hit a point where you just can no longer keep up, and that's why agent orchestration is a thing. So all
But
that.
the reason why I was giggling when you said it was in the back of my mind, I'm sitting here thinking about like, wow, the a large percentage of my day is just context switching anyway.
Well, you're very skilled at it.
And yeah, and so and then the other thing that popped into my head was I immediately thought of like, do you remember like it was probably about 3 months ago, there was this whole spate of articles of people going like working with LLMs or like, agentic coding is basically a manager's skill. So like the better you are as a manager, the more you can handle that. And I'm just like looking at this thinking like, yeah, that is actually kind of dead on. Like now that it's sort of like put through this very nicely worded lens because
Yeah,
it's
and I
very
think.
different. It's not that different than having reports and they're, I'm stuck by this. I'm blocked. This team is whatever,
Right. It's
except
still exhausting, just in a different way. Yeah. And so then he talks about finding your ceiling, and the way to do that is usually by blowing past it. Because when we first get a coding agent, we just want to spin out as many as we can, and then eventually it blows by your cognitive capacity to handle all these agents. So what do we do? What he does is he treats long agentic sessions the way he treats deep focus work. He's trying to time box each agent with explicit scopes per thread. So don't do a thing and then see the output and be like, oh, by the way, let's also add this thing while we're at it and fix A, B, and C, because now all that is going into your cognitive context. Create, small scope and start a new agent with completely new context if you need to. And then to start with less threads, then it may feel comfortable or feel right to you. It's always a little better to go a little slower than go a little faster, because I think to counter the fact that naturally you want to always have more. Since the total number of agents you can run at the same time is going to be very much thread dependent and context dependent to begin with, there probably isn't a natural limit for all tasks. But for me personally, on my side projects, it's probably 4 agents if they're working on different projects, and like 3 if it's the same project, or other way around. But usually they're fairly long running, so I have like 4 of them. Like do a research, write a thing, and then do the code and do a bug fix. That I can handle with the same project. Yeah, what's your ceiling?
I don't multiplex personal projects at all. Like that's
Yeah,
usually just one.
that's because you don't use agents.
I mean, I do, but probably not as long running, I think, as you're talking about. Like it's mostly like working like more like pair programming than it is, at least for personal stuff. For work, I tend to have anywhere from 4 to 6 agent windows open at a given time, but usually not more than like max 4 are doing something at once. And typically only 2 are doing real work and the other ones are looking up relevant things that I'll then piece back into the other contexts, like for like big sort of like distributed kind of things, where it's like I need to know how this system works in detail and then this one needs to work,
No.
Yeah.
So we are opposites. On my personal project, I do a lot more.
Yeah.
Here's a research task.
Yeah.
Here's a find stuff. Where at my work project, I already know the code base fairly well, so I tend to follow a lot more closely. But it seems like we're pretty much in agreement, right? Like if you're gonna follow the code very closely, you probably end up at like 2 or 3. If you have more researchy tasks where you can push it off with a fairly tight scope and come back and read the artifact, then you can do a little more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I found that to be really a useful pattern too, generally, is just like go out. And the other one I've been doing lately that I think is fun is I'll clone a whole bunch of repos into one place and be like at mention files that I think are relevant in the different repos and then kick off a research and just give it like carte blanche to read all of them. And like, it's pretty interesting to like see how well an agent can like really comprehend with like a complex distributed system that has, multiple separate code bases that all work together in some way, especially without being able to necessarily like see the linkage, right? Because I don't necessarily always have like the info repos and stuff too. Like, it's like, did a pretty good job inferring how those two things work together from just like very vague, prompt and some, digging. So it's pretty cool.
They're getting better at doing autonomous research for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next on the docket, let's talk about Code is Cheap, and that changes everything by Pierre Villega.
With a little Kent Beck reference, right, to start us off with. So there's the sort of now almost famous quote from Kent Beck: 90% of my skills went to $0, and 10% of my skills just went up 1,000x. And essentially, what they're getting at with that is the ability to have a vision and sort of like chart your path through a large, complex project became incredibly valuable. And the ability to stare at a screen and crank out like nitty gritty little detail work became, I wouldn't argue worthless, but significantly less valuable than it was in the past. So yeah, the core point of this is one that I don't necessarily agree with, which is that like code has always been expensive. And I think that's why I think it's a little bit of a counterpoint to what, like, at least my general opinion, because it's like coding, in my opinion, coding has never really been the problem. Like, it's definitely a part of the job, but it's like not the expensive part. But I do agree with this post in the sense that like coding has gotten a lot cheaper, right, than it was before even. Anyway, I'm putting too much of my own opinion. Yeah, the little chunk on that LLMs are not a immediate, how can I explain this better? Good code button, right? You can't push them and expect to get great, perfectly working code out of the box. It still requires being a fairly good developer yourself, looking at what's going on, deciding whether or not that's a good thing and allowing it in or not. Yeah, and then like I guess getting more into the stuff that I do agree with a lot, and this is where I've mentioned this before too, but I feel like the camps that developers are breaking down into are like getting more nuanced as like AI happens over time, right? So I feel like this post kind of falls into the camp of the product focused developer that doesn't necessarily care as much about the code and cares more about like shipping the artifact, right? In the sense that like he kind of talks a little bit about, here's a example of a really successful consumer to consumer. Wait, what is C2C? Consumer to consumer sales? Yeah, marketplace. Okay, yes. So marketplace, I don't know, I like Craigslist or something like that, right? Super successful. What's in it? Is it the code, like all the, JavaScript? Is it the sort of like non-functional requirements, like the latency, how good is it up, can you use it all the time, blah, blah, blah? Or is it the fact that it's a successful C2C sales that is the asset too, right? It's the other way I kind of looked at it.
I think they make a point that what is good code, the definition of good code really hasn't changed. Like, we still care about testability, maintainability, elegance of the code, but most importantly, we care about whether or not the code does the work that's supposed to do. Like, that part hasn't changed. And good developers who care about the technical aspects of creating maintainable, well architected systems, that part hasn't changed at all. Right. And the output at the end of the day, the only thing that ultimately matters to the marketplace has always been whether or not the system is of value to others.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my biggest takeaway from this article, well, maybe not the biggest takeaway, but the one that my heart was screaming with agreement was this line here. But this isn't really about AI enthusiasm or AI skepticism. It's about industrialization. It has happened over and over in every sector, and the pattern is always the same. The people who industrialize outcompete those who don't. You can buy handmade pottery from Etsy, or you can buy it mass-produced from a store. Each proposition values different things, but if you're running a business that depends on pottery, you better understand the economics. And that, I think, gets at the heart of the issue. Like, we can still handcraft fun weekend projects, but the marketplace that pays us our good salaries for now cares about good code that produces economically valuable systems for people. And,
right.
and
yeah,
that part
it's really
is
about
always
the business. The business.
Yeah. So Doesn't hurt to learn the tools.
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing that, right? Is I think even folks that have been pretty skeptical are coming to that realization, perhaps painfully or not, that
Right.
now is well, we're a little bit past the now is the time to learn it. But like, if you haven't, there's a very real chance that you will be left behind. And I'm seeing that personally as like attitudes shifting, right? Like there was a period of time where like I would intentionally instruct agents to like remove all trace of it being agent coding because I didn't want to be judged for using them at work. And now it's all over the place. So there might be still people judging, but if so, they're doing it internally instead of sort of publicly.
Silently judging. That's my favorite kind of judging.
I mean,
sitting in the corner, crossing my legs. Yeah, all that. I think, we started a podcast right around the time. We started a podcast right around the time when Opus 4.5 was released, and that was kind of like looking back, that was probably the beginning. Yeah, and now we're halfway through, somewhere along the adoption cycle. All right, let's move on to Vibe Intel, where I'm gonna share some personal experience.
Sad news
with Cloud Code. Yeah, so I don't know if you heard, but Anthropic has been threatening to disable third-party OAuth for their regular subscriptions, really, so that OpenClaw is not running a Pro or Max subscription and burning up tokens all night long. Done that for a while. They apparently killed all OpenClaws, so now they're moving on to PyAgent. And Thursday or Friday last week, they included the PyAgent system prompt as one of the signatures they were looking for. I started getting 401s when I was trying to log in using my Cloud Code subscription for PyAgent, so I had to adopt. What I ended up doing, instead of going to OpenAI, is I ended up just chucking all my existing PyAgent skills and existing work into a Cloud Code instance and just told Claude, like, hey, either reference these skills or produce a skill that does what these Py skills would do. And I can report
channels too.
I did not use channels. I'm just using it like a regular Cloud Code instance, but with these new skills that I've been creating using Py. I have to say I don't like the output as much, potentially because I was just used to the old Py output. But in theory, it's not that big of a difference. It's just some system prompt differences. But it feels like since the old skills were created using a different harness, I could tell it just doesn't sit right with me. This feels like when a company does a huge redesign of their website and you're just like, this doesn't sit right. Something feels off, man.
I don't like it. It's purple now and it used to be blue.
Yeah, it would do things that it didn't used to do, and I get a little ticked off. It's a little less eager, but that is fine. I'm learning to deal with the loss of PyAgent as of now. But what I did end up doing was I switched over a lot of my podcast-related workflows over to Cloud Code, and I was using it to update our existing site that is just like a boilerplate site from our hosting services over to a brand spanking new Astro site from scratch using Cloud Code this past weekend. And I did run into some of the issues that we talk about, which was Cloud is not good at doing front-end design at all. And what I had to go back to was I went back to, are you familiar with the site Code Drop?
No.
It's like a high-end magazine for web designs. So it showcases designer portfolios. It has a lot of cool design examples and templates, and think like a coffee table magazine, but for web design.
I've seen something similar, which is like Godly, I think, something like that.
Yeah, and I've had Code Drop in my RSS feed for the longest time. So I went in there looking for design inspirations, and I found a cool like WebGL based dithering image animation, and use that as our new background image for our news site, along with blog posts and topics and glossary and all that good stuff. Overall, a smooth experience, but I am still mourning no longer be able to use PyAgent with my Cloud Code subscription. I need to
I'm glad that I didn't invest super heavily in PyAgent yet. I was still futzing around trying to give it a home lab home and where it could run free and unfettered. And yeah, didn't get there yet.
Yeah, I may end up switching to like Chemi or GLM or ZAI or something like that. I need to run some experiments to see which one I prefer.
What I was playing with on that was because I have a desktop with like 128 gig of video RAM, like so I can run it like decently big open weight models. So what I was trying to do was make it so that it would run on Claude for anything that like required sort of like real thinking, and then stuff like just like heartbeat processing or like small tasks I could just run locally to not that it was like necessarily saving anything because it was through the subscription, but like you could also look at a model like that too, where you just use API when you need it, right? Like legit.
Yeah. Well, not using API, but PyAgent has access to the command line. So Claude Code is just one skill that I can use.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah.
Whoa.
That's true.
Well, look forward to next week's Byte and Tell, guys.
Version 5 code's a container for Claude Code.
That's gonna be fun. Anywho, so that's been my experience.
How much video RAM do you have to run a model? You have like a 40 something.
I have a 4090 that I haven't been playing around with, which I really should. So, all right. I'm not sleeping.
I'm always pushing open weight stuff on the podcast. Is it's like, control the means of your token generation.
I love that. Okay. Yeah. On to my favorite segment, Dan's rant.
Deep breath, Dan, everyone.
What new technology do you have? Talk about this week. Do you read about?
It's not new technology. Through a set of circumstances that we shan't name, I was challenged with installing Claude Code on Windows subsystem for Linux, which is like the least accurately named product ever, because it sort of implies like Windows is running on Linux, but really it's the other way around. We won't get into why, but holy cow. It was the most frustrating experience I've had in a long time. And the way that I solved it actually had nothing to do with Claude and everything to do with like old school sleuthing. So the issue is WSL basically runs in its own little VM sandbox, right? And so when you install Claude Code, you just install the Linux version, which is great. And then it tries to pop a browser. I guess these days you can actually run browsers in WSL too, which I didn't realize.
I don't see why not, yeah.
But
graphics,
but I didn't have one installed. It instead just poops out the whole giant like OAuth URL, and it's like, proceed a copy of this, which is great. Nice little feature there. Props, Anthropic. And you paste it into a browser, and then it's like, log in if you're not logged in. Do you authorize this Claude Code instance? Okay. And then it gives you a code that you paste back in because it's like, you can't just like directly authorize it because it's running in a sandbox. So for some reason, and I don't know why, Windows terminal mangles the OAuth string that you paste back in. Just doesn't accept it. No different variable, Control Shift V, Control V, right click paste, nothing worked. I was just like, what do I do here? So I was, old fashioned Googling it because first thing to do, of course, was ask Claude, and Claude had no idea, which is unfortunate. So I was old fashioned Googling it, and I came across a GitHub issue for this very issue. So apparently there's actually other people actually running it on Windows. Who knew? Never thought I'd be one of them, but here we are. And the way to make it work is probably the most hilarious thing I've ever seen, and it worked. And then the funny part was like Claude left off with like does this work? When I was like, I'm gonna try this, and I told it, and it was like, I'm genuinely surprised that works. So I was like, me too, Claude.
Of course.
And what it was, is literally a PowerShell script that invokes typing. And it types every single character of first of all, it's kind of wild that that's even a thing. But basically, it says sleep for 3 seconds and then type the OAuth thing into the terminal window from the clipboard, essentially. Yeah. So it works.
That's very clever.
And then it even presses enter for you as the end part of the script, which I thought was cute. Yeah. But it's like, whoa, how is it that bugged that you can't just paste the damn thing? Like, I don't understand what in the custom terminal renderer they're doing there, either on the Windows side or on the Ink, which is as we found out, the internals. Not React Ink, Vadim, but their custom ink that they wrote.
Do you have any other issues running Claude Code?
Once I got through the auth, it ran fine.
Are there any
Yeah.
other system issues? Because then you have to mount and unmount in order to get your context in there.
I mean, I didn't use it like super extensively, so I don't know. But I think I'm pretty sure if you use VS Code, it spins up WSL, or you can set it to spin up WSL
Okay.
for you in the
Yeah.
project folder. I think it auto mounts all that stuff. So like I think at a per project basis, it's probably not that bad. But couldn't tell you. That might be a future dance rant if I have to keep using this.
Makes sense. Dance rant this week brought to you by Microsoft. Thank you, Microsoft.
X
You're now a sponsor,
Anthropic.
but
Yeah.
you're certainly not going to be one now after all that.
Unless you fix your damn terminal. Yeah. Anyway,
All right.
on to
Well,
happier news or less
rant.
happy news. Let's see how we go this week.
Yeah, let's talk about 2 minutes to midnight, where, as always, we talk about the state of the potential AI bubble using the atomic clock analogy from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists.
Which we can talk about again now that we're not close to
now that we're no longer
slinging
worried
nukes.
about nuclear war. Yes, I feel so much better. Yeah, we were at a minute 45. And what you got for us this week?
Yeah. So first up is a TechCrunch article. I feel like TechCrunch is always good for the latest, greatest AI financial news. And it is entitled "The AI Gold Rush is Pulling Private Wealth into Riskier, Earlier Bets." So the premise of the article is like, for a long time, VCs have been investing in, all kinds of different startups. And I guess you can also kind of get private equity on some of those bets too. But what we're seeing now is that people are so freaked out by the relative pace in AI that, like, pace of advancement, that they're treating it as like an investment risk to not have sufficient market position in AI stocks. And because everyone is like scrambling for like that sort of like private market share, the only way to grow the pie of what's available to invest in is to go earlier and down, like, down the investment chain, so to speak.
Right.
So smaller, earlier, less good ideas, etc. And that is, having a large impact on the sort of like chain of money that shapes startup investment.
Yeah, there was a time when I worked at a small family office in New York for managing money for billionaires, and that would not put it past me. That's the kind of thinking that is very in vogue right now on Wall Street. But I think this could be a good thing when it comes to the overall impact of the bubble. If most of that money is coming from high net worth individuals, let's call them, then if the bubble does burst, it's only the high net worth individuals that will be impacted, as opposed to the common stockholder, the yeoman farmers of the Midwest who are not billionaires.
I suppose that's true, but I think you also have to look at it through the lens of like, this is essentially a forcing function on the risk tolerance of the investors, right? So they are now being driven towards crappier bets overall in a way to just stay in this market. And I don't see that as a good thing. I think that it means that it's the equivalent of like, what was that crazy, like a really odd startup that everyone always likes to talk about, is like the pet one or something like that. I forget.
Pets.com.
Yeah, something like that.
Or Webvan.
Webvan, yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. Because it's like that, where it's like when you sit there and look at the business model in the cold light of day, you're like, what is this? Or I think the LM version of that is like, this is just a wrapper around something and you're getting how much funding,
Yeah. Well, what we are saying is it's time to build your own LLM wrapper, gang, listeners.
Get
Dennis
funded.
nodding in agreement.
Use it to buy hardware so you can run your own model. I don't know.
I'm surprised. Okay. Well, my article this week is from the Implicator,
which is a great name.
AI, a great name. It's titled "OpenAI CRO tells staff Anthropic inflate run rate by 8 billion." Sorry, 8 million. What is that? Trump change
with a B. That'll barely even fund my AI wrapper. What are you talking about?
Exactly. So what happened was this week, the OpenAI chief revenue officer stated that Anthropic has overstated its 30 billion run rate by about 8 billion. through revenue accounting tricks. And as always, we love it when the podcast talks about accounting topics, right? As someone who was also an ex-accountant, let's talk about this. So when OpenAI sells its models through a third-party provider, OpenAI only recognizes its net revenue. So if I sell my model to Dan for $9 model, Dan sells it to the end customer for $1 as a cut. OpenAI in this case will only recognize the $9. And Anthropic, however, will recognize the entire $10 as its raw revenue number. Now, you may ask, hey, who is right? Both are actually correct according to US GAAP. So both are valid. But what I find actually most interesting about this news article is that OpenAI is not in a good spot if your chief revenue officer has to go on record saying Anthropic is overstating its revenue number.
Mhm.
We know for a fact that Anthropic's revenue has been growing pretty much like mad since the whole Pentagon thing, and since its enterprise lead has just kind of broadened over time. I think Anthropic almost has as much revenue as OpenAI at this point. Maybe it's even about to surpass it. So that could be another reason why the chief revenue officer is here going like, hey, well, it's going to surpass it if you don't account for the cut that like AWS takes. But that's not a good sign. When you have to like go into accounting rules details, you're in trouble. And Dan, I know you've been on team OpenAI. In terms of you've been on team OpenAI is the first one that is going to fall, and I am on team Oracle. So this does not look good for my bets here.
Team OpenAI. Yeah.
Team OpenAI is winning. If by winning you mean losing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe. I mean, it's like, with most things, are they too big to fail? Blah, blah, blah. But like, yeah,
Right.
it is pretty interesting signal.
All that said, how do we feel about the 2 minutes to midnight clock this week?
We're at 1:45. I'm actually not. This is not a good news of the two things that we've brought, at least by any means. But I'm also not super pessimistic about it.
No, me
Because I
neither.
think that like OpenAI has recognized the fact that they have an enterprise weakness right now, and they're pivoting towards it actively. They've just announced that, they've killed Sora, a bunch of other things. They've done a lot of little moves like this where they're getting a lot more focused as a company. And they, at least in the current environment, don't see that as a bad thing.
Yeah.
Will it pan out for them? Who knows? But I don't think that in immediate danger of dying.
This is a segment where we bring up financial news from the web about AI companies. But I think the biggest news item is actually the Anthropic Mythos news item, right? The fact that the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States is having active discussions along with other large banks to talk about the latest AI model. We are already in too big to fail territory.
Yeah. That's fair.
Right. So I'm happy to move this bad boy back like 45 seconds, even a minute until the whole Project Glasswing thing shakes down. Because if you can hack any computer in the world,
yeah,
what is money?
Like maybe now we're seeing the step change that people have been talking about. We talk a lot about like the 4.5 to 4.6-ish era step change with like the Opus models, and like Codex 5.4 and all that is like really kind of moved the needle. And it's like, well, maybe there is a big thing, and some of the anti-doomers are right. So we'll see.
Anti-doomers are right. Oh, yeah. Even if it's
I don't even know where I
25%
fall
chance.
on that spectrum. I change every week. I think that's partially why we go back and forth.
I'm putting my foot down. I think we should go back, even if it's only a 25% chance of this thing being a true step change. If it is a step change, it's so earth-shattering that the expected value is still just much higher. 25 of a billion is a very large number. 25% of a billion, I should say. Yeah. I'm happy to move it back. Like,
okay,
a minute.
I'm sold. Okay.
2:45 and change. All right. And we're sold. And as always, if I had like a gavel or something, that would be nice.
That's my best gavel sound effect for you.
Well, with the sound of the gavel, it brings us to the end of the show. Thank you again for joining us for our discussion this week. If you like the show, if you learned something new, please share the show with a friend. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps people to discover the show, and we really appreciate it. If you have a segment idea, a question for us, or a topic you want us to cover, please shoot us an email at humans@adipod.ai. We love to hear from you. You can find the full show notes, transcripts, and everything else mentioned today at www.adipod.ai. Thank you again for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
For
Bye.
more awesome sound effects.
Oh, Dan, you gotta work on it and give me like 10 sound effect ideas by next week. I only have the laser. Pew, 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 pew. That's my favorite. So.
Excellent. Thank you.